This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez, and today I'm doing another episode in my Building the Shot series. If you guys are not familiar with what this series is, it's a series that I started recently where I explain as much as I can about how I created a certain photo that I'm going to be highlighting in every single episode. Today I'm going to be going over this image on the screen of my friend and model Julie that I took last year in August. If you're already familiar with this series, you would know that this is just the final version of the shot, and in a bit I'm going to go ahead and explain step by step how I created this image, as well as show you guys some of the images taken directly before it. But before I go ahead and explain that, I want to talk about the gear first because that's something that's really important to the shot as well. I'm going to go ahead and take this image off the screen for a second so I can bring up the behind the scenes shot of that photo so you guys can see all the gear while I talk about the gear. When it comes to the lighting that we used, I used a rare 2-light setup. I typically use 1 light, but this shot definitely needed a little bit of separation because it was a little bit dark behind Julie. So I used 2 lights. The main light is a Godox AD600B, also known as the Explore 600 TTL, but I shot manually, I didn't use TTL. And it's modified by the Rapidbox XXL, that's their 48-inch octabox. The rim light is a Godox AD200, also known as the Evolve 200, and that's modified by the Cheetah Stand 26-inch quick soup bowl, I believe they call it, which is their beauty dish. The things that are holding these lights are a flashpoint C-stand on the left. You can see that Ashley's on the flashpoint C-stand. And I actually really like the C-stand because it's very sturdy, but it is also a little bit heavy. So I recommend using something like that cart there that you can see in the foreground. That's a foldable cart. That's Eli's. He has a red version of it. I have a blue version, but it's really helpful in carrying a lot of gear in case you need to move around a bit and have a lot of stuff with you. The thing that's holding the Godox AD200 on the right there is a PhotoFlex Light Reach Plus, which is handheld very dramatically by Eli Infante, another friend and photographer of mine. And he actually set up the shoot, so big thanks to him for allowing me to take a couple of photos during the shoot. If you're curious about the other gear that's in the shot, you can see the 10-bell bag that I used for holding my lights there next to the cart. And inside the cart is an Omega reflector that I personally don't own. It's Eli's, but we didn't really use it for any of the shots that I think we took that day. On the Rapidbox, I had 2 layers of diffusion. And if you guys are curious about what diffusion is or what it even does to the light, I have a video on that you guys can check out in the top right corner of the screen. On the Cheetah Stand modifier, I believe there's only 1 layer of diffusion on the outside with an internal reflector on the inside. But if that's not true, or if there's something else that I need to correct, I'll correct myself on the bottom of the screen right now. That's pretty much all the gear that we used. I'll leave links to all the gear in the description area below in case you guys want to get some of that gear yourself. But one thing I want to talk about now is how the lights are positioned, because that's something that you guys have been asking me to explain a little bit in this video series. I'm going to go ahead and leave the behind the scenes on the screen right now so you guys can kind of see how the lights are positioned as I talk about the positioning of the lights. I typically have the main light always above eye level by at least a foot and angled down because I like a little bit of drama and the shadows that you get by positioning the light like that, you know, a little bit above the eye and angled down. You're going to get nice shadows to define the phase, and you're also going to have a nice little bit of depth that's going to be created with those shadows. It's easily my most used lighting position because I love that depth that you can create with those shadows. If you guys are curious about where I decide to place the light, I always have it facing wherever the subject is facing. So if they're facing to the left side, camera left, then I'll place the light camera left. If they're facing to the right, then I'll place the light camera right. The Godox AD200 on camera right isn't at an angle because I wanted the light to be nicely even lit through the back of her head, the top of her head, and a little bit to the lower back. Because as we were taking pictures, I noticed that there needed to be light hitting that area, so I didn't have it at an angle. If I had it at an angle, then it would just be hitting pretty much on the head and then maybe at the shoulders and kind of just fall off after the shoulders. All right, so that's all the gear and the lighting positions. Now I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys some of the straight out of camera shots that I ended up taking before that final shot that I ended up editing. Okay, so here's the first straight out of camera shot that I ended up taking of Julie in this area. If you guys are thinking to yourself, it looks a little dark, it's because it is a little dark. And one thing I ended up doing in Lightroom is adjusting the exposure to be 2/3 of a stop brighter, as well as really bringing out the colors. So after I did those adjustments, it went from looking like this to this. I could go ahead and show you guys the rest of the shots exactly how they look like straight out of camera, which is gonna be a little bit dark and a little bit less vibrant. But I'm gonna go ahead and just skip that process and show you guys how they look like with those adjustments made. So with this shot, I did end up thinking that I wanted to take a horizontal photo, and that's what I ended up taking. But for this specific shot, that's what I had in mind. And one thing I do want to let you guys know before I even continue talking about the rest of the photos that I end up taking is that this was my first time working with Julie. So I didn't know how she works with photographers. And one thing that I learned as I was taking photos of her is that she likes to flow pose. If you guys are not familiar with what flow posing is, it's basically when you take a shot and the model changes her pose after every single shot. I'm not a fan of flow posing because I like to nail down my lighting and my composition and other things, and I want that pose to stay the same. So when I was working with Julie for the first time, I realized that I could either tell her right away that, you know, can you calm down for a second, because I'd like to keep the same pose. But one thing I ended up doing for this shot was just letting her do her own thing because I didn't really have an exact pose in mind. The things that are going through my head as I take this first shot is that her back is showing a lot and it's very dark. So I do want her to adjust her pose so that the back is showing less, or what I end up doing later is getting a light to kind of fill in that dark area so that I can continue taking the photos and it just not sticking out like a sore thumb being very dark. And to contradict myself in what I just said, in the very next shot, there's still a lot of back showing, and also the horizon is a little bit weird. I don't know what was going through my head when I took the shot other than me seeing all that blue. If you focus on just the background in the previous shot, which is this one right here, you can see that the blue is still there, but I wasn't angled in a position where it was just kind of filling up the entire frame. So in the next shot, which is this one again, you can see that all that blue is filling up the shot, and I think that was going through my head the most with all that color. So I don't know why my horizon is all messed up. I don't drink, so yeah, I just focus on the color. That's pretty much why I chose this framing, but the horizon is still a little bit off. Another thing that was going through my head when I took this shot is that it's in portrait orientation, and previously in another shot, in the last shot, I was using landscape orientation. So I do tend to favor portrait orientation, so I stuck to it for the next shot, but a couple of other things are adjusted as well. In this shot here, I used the setting of 1/640th of a second shutter speed. In the next shot, I end up going a little bit faster at 1/2000th of a second, which makes the background darker. And I also add a secondary light source. I add that Godox AD200 with the cheetah stand modifier in the back. So this is the next shot right here. So at this point, I feel like the background is a little bit too dark. I think that's what I was aiming for, but once I took that shot, I realized that's not what I wanted after all. So one thing I do want to mention is that when I changed the shutter speed to be faster from 1/640th of a second to 1/2000th, I also have to increase the power output of the lights so that they're not going to be underpowered or underexposed. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you adjust the shutter speed to be faster, you also need to increase the power output of the lights. With this shot, I introduced the rim light so you guys can see a little bit of the light hitting the side of her arm. I feel like it's a little bit too low, so I end up adjusting it to be brighter. But one thing I do want to focus on, or one thing that I'm focusing on right now as I see the image, is that I do like the richness of the browns in her hair. But again, the background is just a little bit too dark, so I went from 1/640th in the first shot, in the second shot, and in this shot I'm at 1/2000th, and in the next shot I'm about to show you, I go from 1/2000th of a second to 1/800th of a second, which is this shot right here. So what I'm gonna do right now is throw both of the images on the screen so you guys can see exactly how they differ. The shadows aren't gonna be different at all because the lights were in the exact same position, but there are going to be changes in the ambient light, like I mentioned before, as well as things like her hair being a little bit different because of how windy it was that day. But back again to just this photo on the screen, I wanted you guys to see the difference between this shot and the next one, because it's not going to be different in terms of lighting output or ambient light, but again, just her pose being different. The main difference in this next shot and the last shot is that her head is tilted upward, so the light is filling in her face a lot better than before. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the last shot right now, so you guys can see that there's a little bit of light, or a little bit of shadow actually, in the bags underneath her eyes, as well as not enough light hitting inside the eyes. So the difference between this shot and the next one is how much light is fitting in her face. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw back the other shot, the next shot, on the screen so you guys can really focus on that. In this shot, you can also see that her back is showing a little bit more because of how arched it is compared to the last one. One thing that was going through my head was not so much the pose in this shot, but how much rim light was showing up on her back. Initially, I thought I wanted just a hint of it so that you can get a little bit of separation, but then I wanted to add more of that rim light to be more present in the shot. So I went from this shot to this one. You can definitely see that she showed more of her back in this shot, which shows more of the rim light that I increased the output of. And you can see that her hair is also showing up a lot more because of how much light is hitting her hair. This shot and the next one were again flow poses. She was deciding her poses on her own, and I was just kind of focused on the lighting and the composition. I thought I wanted portrait orientation for this shot and the next one, but obviously I messed up on the composition on this photo, but I went ahead and just decided I wanted to go horizontal orientation, landscape orientation. So this is the next shot after this one right here. Once I took this shot, I realized there was a couple of things that I really liked in terms of the orientation. I liked how the landscape orientation looked like because of the different colors that were showing up in the background and not just only blue. I also liked lighting. I felt like the rim light was exactly where I wanted it to be, as well as the main light. And I really liked her pose being on the railing. So those were some things that were going through my head when I took this shot. The only thing I didn't like about this shot was how much the light wasn't filling in her eyes and underneath her eyes because of the way that her head was positioned. So since I like all the other things like I mentioned with the composition and the lighting and her hand position, the only thing I need to tell her is just to go ahead and just aim her head a little bit up. So that's what I ended up telling her to do, and it ended up with this shot. As soon as I took this shot and the light was filling her face a lot better and her expression was great as well and everything was exactly where I wanted it to be, I decided this is the photo that I'm gonna go ahead and stick with. And I only took, I think, one more shot after this one before I went ahead and took that behind the scenes shot. If you're curious like me and want to see that shot, I'll go ahead and show you guys right now. This is that shot that I took after that last one, the one that I ended up editing. And as you guys can see, since her head is tilted down, there's again that little bit of lack of light in her eyes and underneath her eye. Now back to this shot that we're going to be talking about. After I took the photo and I made those adjustments in terms of exposure and the color, I felt like there's a little bit more that I could do with the image in terms of how much light is fitting in her eyes. So I did a couple of different adjustments in terms of the adjustment layer brush in Lightroom. I increased the exposure in her eyes just a little bit, as well as the color, and I added a little bit more exposure, I believe, in the hair area and a little bit on her. So after I made those adjustments, it went from looking like this to looking like that right there. The adjustments I do in Lightroom are pretty much always minor ones in terms of exposure and color, and I do more of the heavy lifting work in Photoshop. And I was going to show you guys a screen recording of me showing you guys all the different layers individually, but for some reason the screen recording was acting up, and instead I'm going to go ahead and just show you guys each of the different layers that I exported from that Photoshop file so you guys can see exactly what I did. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the photo that I ended up exporting from Lightroom with all the different adjustments that I made in terms of adding a little bit of exposure on her face and the eyes and a little bit of exposure around her. But the next shot that you're about to see is the adjustments that I made immediately afterwards. The first thing that I saw when it came to this photo was how much her ribs were showing a little bit too much. So one thing I ended up doing first is adjusting the color as well as dodging and burning her ribs. So you guys can see that in this shot right here. The next thing that I noticed that I needed to fix was a little bit of the bag underneath her eye, as well as a little bit of brightness in the forehead. I felt like it was just a tad little bit too hot. So I went ahead and just dodged and burned those two areas to get this shot right here. One thing I also do in Photoshop that I could do in Lightroom technically is remove some of the blemishes using the spot removal tool. So that's what I did in this very next step right here. The next thing that I did was frequency separation, and sometimes I don't use this at all because it can easily be overdone. So when I used it in this image, I try to keep it as light as possible on her. One thing I did adjust a little bit dramatically was the color in the sky. So let me go ahead and throw the image on the screen right now, so you guys can see exactly what I did. From the last image to this one, I felt like the blue in the sky, specifically in the top left there, I felt like it was just kind of just too abrupt. So I wanted to try to ease that transition and make a gradient of some sorts. So I did my best to do that using the stamp tool, I believe. And I went ahead and just kind of used the frequency separation area as well to kind of just ease up the veins on her hand and on her wrist there. The very next thing I did was remove some of the distractions that kind of just were going through my head when I was looking through the image and scanning it. I felt like that bokeh ball right there in the back was just sticking out like a sore thumb, so I went ahead and removed it. Let me go ahead and just throw the next image on the screen right now. So you can see that I removed the bokeh ball right there. I also removed a little bit of the scar under her belly button, as well as some of the things that were showing up on her shirt. After that was done, I felt like the image was pretty much edited exactly how I wanted it to be. And sometimes the last thing I do is add a little bit of noise, so that's what I ended up doing, which ended up being this shot right here. It's very minor, but you can kind of see it in the shadowed areas. And that's pretty much everything that I can explain about how this photo was created. If I forgot anything, or if you guys are curious about something that I might have not mentioned, definitely let me know in the comment section below. As I mentioned before in the beginning of the video, this video is actually sponsored by Squarespace, so big thanks to them for doing that. It really helps support the channel and helps me get more time to making these types of videos. So huge thanks to them again. I want to go ahead and end the video with talking about a little bit of things that are really good about Squarespace and why you guys might want to make your website with them as well. Squarespace is the perfect all-in-one platform that allows customers to both claim a domain, build a website, sell online, and market your brand. With hundreds of beautiful designer templates, you can choose exactly how you want your website to look and display your images. They also have award-winning 24/7 customer service to help you set up your website if you have any issues at all. It's also simple to set up or transfer your domain with Squarespace, which is something that I actually took advantage of myself. And again, they really make it easy to set up an online store, which is something that I'm strongly considering doing soon. Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/FJH to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.